Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Know-How is brought to you by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This episode is brought to you by Lynda.com. Learn what you want, when you want, with access to over 2,000 high-quality online courses and training videos, all for one low monthly price. To try it free for 7 days, visit lynda.com/knowhow. That's LYNDA.com/knowhow. Today, you'll know how to choose your podcasting mic, how to make a Raspberry Pi MAME machine, and how to dump your ROMs. Welcome to Know How. It's Twit's project show where we show you some interesting projects and give you all the knowledge you need to do it. I'm Father Robert Balacer, the digital Jesuit. Normally I'd be standing next to Ayaz Akhtar, the king of all things DIY, but right now he's busy bringing the One Ring to Mordor. So let's get right to it. I know a few of you out there want to create your own podcast. You see what we do at Twit, you think it's pretty cool, and you want to take your passion and turn it into a show. Well, if you go to YouTube, you can find plenty of shows, most of which are bad. Not because of the content, not because of the video, but because of bad audio. They take any old microphone, maybe the one they use for gaming, the little side boom microphone, maybe even that little iPhone microphone, which we hate on Twit because it sounds so scratchy. But here's the truth. If you're going to create a show, people will deal with bad video, people will deal with bad timing, but if you have bad audio, no one's going to sit through 3 minutes of scratchy, echoey sound. So let's show you exactly how you can choose the right microphone for your podcast. Before we do this, we've got to break down the knowledge. Here's a little bit of a nerd alert because we need you to understand the differences between microphones so you can choose the one that's best for your setup. The first thing you have to know is that we've got several different types of microphones that we've brought into the studio. These are the ones that I actually use inside my setup in San Francisco. This is a standard stick mic. This is what you would use if you're doing sort of a handheld job and you want to be able to put it to your mouth and then the mouth of the person you're interviewing. This runs you about $20, so it's relatively inexpensive. It's a dynamic microphone. We go from that to this MXL. This is a capsule microphone, side address. Decent sound, a bit more expensive. It'll run you about $80. We go from that to this. This is the Audio-Technica 2020. I really like this microphone. This is the one I use in my studio because it's got the right combination of performance and price. It's got a really nice and equal sound, but it only runs about $100. We go from that to this. This is the USB version of that microphone. This gives you all the goodness of the 2020, but it gives you a USB interface. So, you know, it's nice and easy for those people who want that home setup. Now, we make a big jump. These are good microphones. This is the one we use here at Twit. This is the big daddy, the monster sound, the one with the big bottom, the one that Leo swears by. This is the Heil PR40. It's a dynamic microphone that we got from Bob Heil, and it's just the workhorse of Twit. Finally, we've got a few specialty microphones. This right here is an omnidirectional microphone, and I'm going to show you what an omnidirectional microphone can do, because right now, Brian is going to switch to the house mic, which is an omnidirectional microphone. So you can hear me, but you hear it's a little bit echoey because it's picking up everything in the room. I'm going to explain why it does that. Now, finally, we've got the opposite of an omnidirectional microphone. We've got this. This little rat-encrusted thing is a shotgun mic. While a omnidirectional microphone picks up everything, this is sort of like a sonic laser. This lets me choose exactly when I want to pick up and pick up just that sound. Now, we're going to show you which one of these you should pick, but first, let's drop some knowledge, starting with the difference between a dynamic microphone and a condenser microphone. When we talk about dynamic microphones, it's really a diaphragm, so just a really thin piece of material that's connected to a voice coil, a coil of wire. That coil, whenever the diaphragm moves with the diaphragm, and that entire assembly moves over a magnet. As it moves over on a magnet, it generates a current, and that current is an electrical representation of the sound that is striking the diaphragm. In other words, diaphragm moves, Coil moves with diaphragm. Coil makes power. Power is sound. Wonderfully simple system, and it's one of these things that has so few moving parts that it's a really good choice for the beginning podcaster. We go from this to a condenser microphone. A condenser microphone is a bit more complicated because, well, you need what's called phantom power. Whereas a dynamic microphone moves over a permanent magnet, a condenser microphone uses a diaphragm and a charged backplate. You need power to charge that backplate. As the diaphragm moves, it changes the field going through that backplate, and the change in the field is your electrical representation of the sound. Now, the difference between a dynamic and a condenser microphone are more than just different types of technology. It's different. It gives you different types of sound. Whereas a condenser microphone gives you a nice flat sound. Brian's actually going to switch over to my laptop right now and show you the frequency response of a condenser microphone. This is actually the AT2020. It shows you that, as you can see, the frequency response, so how it responds to different frequencies, is pretty much flat. So it's going to give you a really good, accurate representation of whatever the condenser microphone is hearing. Now, if we go to a dynamic microphone, that looks a little bit different. This is actually what a Heil PR40 looks like. So as you can see, at the low end, it gives you a bit of a boom. It gives you a bit of a bass, but then it drops off as you get a bit to the mid-range and to the high. That's why the PR40 sounds really, really good for voice, but sometimes it's not the best choice for, woodwinds. It's not the best for strings. You really need to choose the microphone that's going to do what you want it to do. Okay, so that gives us the difference between the condenser microphone and the dynamic microphone. That's step one. You got to choose which one you want. Do you want the one that's a more accurate representation, or do you want the one like we use that's going to give you that big bottom? And let me tell you, here at Twit, we love the big bottom. Moving on. Okay, so step two. Once we've chosen our dynamic or condenser microphone, we now need to choose the pickup pattern. This is called the polar pickup. Believe it or not, each one of these mics has a different pattern, a different way that it responds to sound, the different way that it picks it up. Now, again, Brian is going to switch over to my, my laptop, assuming that it's still working. And here we have a really good representation of a polar pickup pattern. So what you see here is what an AT2020 hears. It hears a lot of the sound in front, a little bit to the side, and very little to the rear. Now, Brian's going to show you a Wikipedia page that you can go to, and it's going to show you some of the different types of polar pickup patterns that you can purchase. Now, the cool thing about this is you get to choose the type of microphone that works best in your space. So these are our polar patterns. If you have just one person, you're probably going to want to use what's called a cardioid. That's sort of like the kidney, the lima bean looking one that picks up really what's in front of the microphone. We also have omnidirectional, which is what that room mic was doing, so it picked up everything. You have a bi-directional microphone, which you see in some ribbon mics, and that's really good if you're doing an interview show where it's you and someone on the other side of the mic. Then you have sort of the specialty ones. You've got the hypercardioid or the supercardioid, which is this shotgun mic. This is actually a hypercardioid, so it takes that cardioid shape and it extends it forward, and that determines how the mic is going to hear things. What you want, really, is, depending on the type of studio you want, is you want to have a microphone that's going to pick up your sound source without picking up a lot else. You don't want it to pick up the noise, the echo, the stuff off the back wall, the noise out from the street. You want a good mic that has good sound rejection. All of these do sound rejection, but they do it in different ways. You just have to choose the one that's for you. Now, step three. We go from having chosen a condenser or a dynamic, chosen our polar pattern, to choosing our interface, and yes, our price. There are a few different types of interfaces. The first thing I would say is if you've got one that has a 3.5 millimeter interface, don't even consider that. You don't want that. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be horrible in the long run. Throw it away. What you do want is something like this. So this is what you want to see on your microphone. This 3-pin interface is really good because it drops out noise. You want XLR and then convert it to whatever type of input you're actually going to be using on your camera or your laptop, because it will give you the best signal to noise ratio, and it will make sure that you don't get a lot of that hum. All these high-end mics use XLR. But there is another option, and that is this, USB. This is that AT2020 USB Plus from Audio-Technica. If you are a podcaster who is only going to be using one microphone, and you know it's just going to be you, and you want a simple setup, the nice thing about using USB is that you can skip using any other interface. With the Xlr microphones, I actually have to use this mixer, and then I go from this mixer into my computer. With this, I can go straight from the microphone into the computer. So this is my travel mic. This is what I take with me when I need to podcast on the road. This is what I use when I'm doing voiceover at my desk. There is one other option, and that is to get an Xlr microphone and to get something like this from Shure. This is the X2U. This goes from an XLR input to a USB output. So I can take any of these microphones that I've got arrayed over here on this side of the table and convert it into a USB input that I can now use on my computer. Now, let's get to the final piece, and that is price. $20, $80, $100, $120, $340, about $500. So you might be asking yourself, well, Padre, which one of these mics is right for me? And the answer is, I can't tell you that. It all depends on what you're going to be recording. If you're going to be doing interviews, you're probably not going to want to use one of these capsule microphones. You're probably going to want to use a handheld. If you're going to be doing long-range scenery shots, you're probably going to want something like a shotgun to get that noise, to get that environmental sound. If you're in a studio, any one of these will work really well for you. It only depends on how much you want to pay and what kind of sound you want to get out of it. And finally, if you want something that's truly portable, you're probably going to want to go with a USB microphone. Now, there's a lot of stuff that I left out of this because we just don't have the time to talk entirely about sound, about the microphones. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to be coming back here on Know How over and over again to give you individual segments to teach you how to do the craft of podcasting. We're going to show you how to choose your camera. We're going to show you how to video edit using Premiere and Final Cut. We're going to show you how to chroma key. We're going to show you how to do proper lighting. In other words, we want you to know how to do all this. If you want to know more about this, you're going to be able to go to the show notes, which I'm going to, again, hit at the end of the show. But until then, I think what we need to do is pause and talk about our sponsor. You see, if you're watching this show, it tells me that, well, you like knowing about the world. You like having knowledge. You like doing things. And if you like doing things, if you like knowing things, then you're going to love our first sponsor, which is lynda.com, because they're in the business of knowing. Now, lynda.com is an online learning company that can help anyone learn creative, software, and business skills to achieve both their personal and professional goals. With a lynda.com subscription, members receive unlimited access to a vast library of high-quality, current, and engaging video tutorials across a wide variety of subjects. Everything from software like Excel, Photoshop, Dreamweaver, WordPress, QuickBooks, PowerPoint, to business skills, things like resume creation, time management, negotiation, onto hobbies like photography, videography, DSLR video, audio recording, and songwriting, and yes, even programming. From Lynda, you can learn about web development, app development, CSS, SQL, Raspberry Pi, pretty much all the geekiest of the things you'll find at lynda.com. Now, lynda.com helps you to improve your skills by learning new software and keeping up with technology. They have over 2,000 courses with new courses added daily. The new courses added this week include Windows 8.1. So Windows 8.1 was just released. Lynda already has it. Communication across cultures, Photoshop color correction, and creating an iPad app with HTML5 and PhoneGap. Now, instructors are working professionals at the top of their field and expert teachers. In other words, you get to hear this knowledge from people who are actually doing it in the real world. You also get high-quality video production from state-of-the-art studios. These aren't the homemade, bad lighting, bad video, bad audio quality videos that you find on YouTube. These are professional videos done by professionals. They also have curated course content. Each lynda.com course is carefully structured so that users can learn from start to finish or jump to a specific chapter for quick answers. They have easy-to-follow videos that can help you find the answers that you need with, well, just a little bit of time. They also have searchable transcripts that even allow you to search inside a video to save time and find exactly what you're looking for. No more of that scrubbing through a 2-hour video to find that one 15-second piece that is the missing link to your knowledge. They also have bookmarks and playlists that let you organize your courses into a customized learning path that you get to create. Because let's be honest, you know best how you learn best. Lynda also offers courses for all levels. They cover a wide range of technical skills, creative techniques, business strategies, and more. If you're looking to find inspiration and new ideas, lynda.com even offers a series called Creative Inspirations, which are documentaries that follow companies and creative individuals who are leaders, entrepreneurs, inventors, experts, and pioneers in their field. Creative inspiration documentaries include Burt Monroy and Mexopolis Animation Studios. So they really look to people who are doing things in the fields that they're experts in, and they let you see exactly how they find their creative muse. One of the things I really like about Lynda is that I get to watch from the device of my choice. I can watch on my PC, on my laptop, on my tablet, on my mobile device, and I get to switch back and forth, and Lynda keeps my place. It's actually a very underestimated feature. Whether you have 15 minutes or 15 hours, you get to learn at your own pace. In other words, when you have that quiet moment that you just want to break something out, but you know you have another appointment later on, why not bust out your Lynda app and pick up where you left off? Now here's what I'd like you to do. If you're watching Know How, if you want to know more things, if you want to build up your skill level, well, try lynda.com. It's only $25 a month for access to Lynda's entire course library. Or for $37.50 a month, you can subscribe to the premium plan, which includes exercise files that let you follow along with the instructor's projects, using the exact same assets that they use in their videos. And you can try lynda.com right now with a free 7-day trial. Visit lynda.com/knowhow. That's lynda.com/knowhow to access the entire library. That's over 2,000 courses free for 7 days. That's lynda.com/knowhow. And we thank Lynda for their support of Know How. Now, we're done with microphones for now, but what we'd like to do is show you a little bit of MAME. Ayaz and Brian cooked up a project where they took a Raspberry Pi, threw it inside of a Nintendo, and tried to create the ever-popular arcade emulator.
Now, from time to time, I end up in this edit facility because Brian's usually working on know-how stuff, but recently I've noticed he has a couple of Raspberry Pis, and you're building some kind of Nintendo MAME thing going here, right?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, one of those Raspberry Pis is yours, so I should probably give that back to you after this.
Well, since I haven't noticed it missing, clearly you see how often I use it. So You're actually giving it a good use. You're going to make it, well, you got this really beautiful looking case for this Raspberry Pi, but this is the Model B? Or?
This is the Model A, the 256 megabyte version, the lesser of the two, but if you're going to do this MAME project, it works just as well.
All right, so how do we get started on making a Raspberry Pi into a Nintendo MAME?
So I first got started when I saw a Lifehacker article for build an all-in-one retro game console for $35. So since I had a couple Raspberry Pis on hand, I thought this was probably the coolest project I could do with it. And it goes through a pretty simple list of everything that you need to put everything together. But the more in-depth website that I used that helped a lot was the Super Nintendo Pi website that has a lot of details and a lot of step-by-step stuff that you need to get started. What I'm using is an 8GB SD card, which should be more than enough for all the ROMs and everything that we want to use for this project. First thing you're going to want to do is download the Retropie image from petrockblock.com. Next, because I'm using a Mac, I'm going to use the Rpi Sd Card Builder, and what that's going to do is put together the image onto the SD card so that the Raspberry Pi can read it and it'll boot into Emulation Station. And it's going to come up with this white screen asking you to map your controller specifically for Emulation Station. Follow the instructions, and now you'll be inside of Emulation Station. Now obviously we haven't moved over any ROMs. These are just some of the default things that pop up. You've got your Apple II, Doom, and a couple other things listed in here. So since I've mapped the left bumper to exit out of the emulator, that's what I'll do. Now that we're in terminal, we're going to want to set up our global emulator settings for our controllers. And to do that, you're going to type in cd retropie/emulator/retroarch tools. And then after that, you're going to do /retroarch joyconfig retropie configs all retroarch.cfg. So what you're doing here is mapping the global settings for your controller. In our case, we're using this SNES controller. And our next step is to set up the Raspberry Pi config. So in terminal, I'll type in sudo raspberry config. And in this menu system, the first thing we want to do is expand the root FS. And that'll give the Raspberry Pi enough room on the SD card for updating. Once that's finished, you'll want to go to the memory split section. Now, depending on whether you have the 512 megabyte version of the Raspberry Pi or the 256 megabyte version, you want to split it accordingly. So the 256, you'll do it in half, so put in 128, and for the 512, you want to do 256. So exit to terminal. The next step is to update your Pi. What you're going to want to do is type in cd retropie setup and then sudo /retropie setup.sh. So this will load up the script for updating your Pi, and you'll want to update script, then update binaries, and then finally run binaries-based installation. This will take a while, so you might want to go make a cup of coffee or something. Then the next step is to move your ROMs and edit your config files. So in terminal, you want to type in ifconfig, and what that'll do is show you what your IP address is, so that we can use an FTP client to log into it.
Now, why FTP over just simply trying to take the ROM files and putting them on the SD card directly?
Because if you just try and take the SD card out of the Raspberry Pi and put it in your computer, you're not going to be able to see any of those folders.
Can't read any of the files.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and it's a real pain in the butt if you're trying to put all your ROMs on a USB drive and then transfer them over in the OS to the folders. I tried doing that and it took forever, and you have to unplug there's only 2 USB ports, so you have to have your keyboard and your mouse plugged in, and you're trying to move the files over, and then you reboot the Raspberry Pi to make sure it worked. You have to unplug the mouse to plug in your controller. And the FTP client we're using is CyberDuck, and you'll want to go into Quick Connection SFTP, then the server number that you got from looking at when you typed in ifconfig. And then the user for default is always Pi, and the password for default is always Raspberry, all lowercase. Then navigate to your Retropie ROMs. I only want to see the Sega, the NES, and the Super Nintendo. I'm going to create an unused folder and move these other emulators in there. I'm not deleting them, so I can get them back later if I want to. But this way, when I load up Emulation Station, these will be the only 3 emulators that I see loaded up. Transfer the ROMs accordingly to the folders for each one. So I'll be doing the NES, the SNES, and the Sega. And then now that you have all your ROMs moved over, you want to navigate to your Retropie configs and then all config file. The controllers for me were a long process of trial and error, and I have configured them to my preferences. I will make these available on our website show notes so people can copy these and paste them right into their config files and not have to go through the pain and suffering that I did figuring out what buttons were mapped to what. Here's the individual NES config file and the SNES config file. And what you're going to want to do for the Sega Genesis is just do these input menu toggle button and input enable hotkey and input exit emulator. And what these hotkeys are going to allow you to do is get into the menu system for each emulator that you're in, and you can adjust the settings accordingly if you like, and you'll be able to access save states, and you can load states, which is pretty awesome. You can also edit the config files from inside the emulator on the fly if you aren't satisfied with what you have. Basically, that's all you really need to do to get set up and start playing emulators on your Raspberry Pi. But if you'd like to take it another step further and make things a little bit prettier, you'd go to terminal again, do cd retropie setup, sudo /retropie_setup.sh, and what you're going to do is run ES scraper. What that does is it goes and it fetches all the information from scraping what ROMs are available in your folders, and it'll pull album art and descriptions for all your games and make it a little bit cooler looking on the emulation station UI. Now, when I've tried this, it has about a 80% chance of getting the game right. Most of the games on my list are correct with the title and the image, but there are a few that aren't correct, and what we're going to have to do for that is go into the gamelist.xml and edit those manually. I'm using a program called Text Wrangler to edit these XML files. If you're using a PC, Notepad++ is another great program for that. But what you can do is go into the game list, edit the title accordingly, and insert your own description to your liking. And I'm going to put for Final Fantasy, because this is Final Fantasy 3, and then I'm going to change the description. Let's see, Final Fantasy 3 is also known as Final Fantasy 6. And is one of my favorite games. So now if we save the XML, exit out, reboot the Pi, now when we log back into Emulation Station, you can see it no longer says Final Fantasy 2, but Final Fantasy 3, the way I'd like it. I had a lot of fun doing this project, and I definitely stress tested a lot by playing a lot of these games, making sure that this worked perfectly. And it was pretty popular. A lot of people came in and tested it for me, which I appreciated. All right, I guess we should go back to the studio then.
You know, Brian, I love this project. Tell me, how long did it take you to turn this into this?
After about the third attempt, it probably only takes me about an hour to do it now.
So you're more or less an expert.
I guess so.
You know, one of the things I really enjoy about this project is I remember I grew up with these video games, so there's a bit of nostalgia for me. And I remember going to the arcade or getting my Super Nintendo the very first time I got a NES. And you know, now that they've shrunk it down into this, it makes me wonder exactly if they've kept the experience. So tell me, did you do any testing with someone who maybe hadn't played these games growing up? Does it keep that same seat of your pants type feeling?
Oh, I'd say so. It was pretty popular in the studio, and we had a lot of people testing it, and one person was our very own Josh Windish, and I'll play a video that I recorded of that. No. So we were just kicking back in the edit room. I was working. Josh was testing this for me. And
wait, what's wrong with him?
I think he took the word stress test literally.
It's a guy in a cloud. Wait, is he joking? He does this. Oh, no, he does this for real.
Yeah, so it was pretty intense. I mean, I was getting stressed out watching it.
Oh my God.
I gotta get big.
Yeah, so this brought back a lot of memories.
This is how I remember working on an AES.
Oh, the one guy left. Okay, you know what? No, damn, don't. Game over.
Yeah.
Okay, so question answered. Yes, it does have all the energy of the original experience, and now we know that Josh never gets to touch the Raspberry Pi. Now, Brian, this is cool. I mean, I love the fact that you were able to make this project, but you know, with IAS, I believe we have some experience here in the Brick House of people who actually create the ROMs, because you didn't show us how you get the raw dump of those old cartridge games so that we can use it on a Raspberry Pi. So thankfully, IAS had a chat with Radford Castro of Twit, who literally wrote the book about ROM dumping. Let's take a look.
So I was talking to Brian about how he got his ROMs, and he wouldn't tell me specifically. So I had a conversation around Twit. I'm like, how on earth did they get stuff like this on cartridge into a computer? These days, you got Blu-ray games. You can put that on a Blu-ray player, rip it, and probably come up with a ROM. But how on earth did these things interface with PCs so you can get the games off? Having a conversation around work, and then just by weird accident, I happened to run into a guy who literally wrote the book on something called ROM dumping. I didn't know what it was even called. I couldn't even Google search this thing. Turns out it's our own Radford Castro who wrote the book Let Me Play, Stories of Gaming and Emulation. And he can explain to us how on earth Nintendo games, Atari games, cartridge-based games got into PCs. How do I get these into a PC?
Oh, God. How old are these things?
It was 64?
Nintendo 64. So, back in the days, they would have these things called Rom Dumpers, which basically are essentially like little machines, or some are used like what? They look like literally circuit boards, and you basically mount them to the cartridge, the leads of the cartridge, and then dump like, you know, ROM files into the PC, where it is that you're dumping to. Sometimes like those old school zip drives, which a lot of people did back in the days, but that's kind of how you would do it. It was really kind of straightforward, but you know, more ROMs became more encrypted, and it got kind of harder to dump. But it's essentially just a machine that sits just like this, and you put your cartridge on top of it, and there's a bunch of wires that come out. They get attached to the PC, or they get attached to some other like ROM dumping type of device that's usually not sold here in the United States. So first they had to figure out how like the information was kept inside. So these are all read-only memory, right? And they had to mimic this by creating these separate types of, I guess, memory catchers, which they did back in the days. And they're essentially just little tiny PCs. But the thing that made it difficult was kind of interfacing with them. So they had to reverse engineer this and figure out how they created the cartridge in the first place, right? So when they're manufacturing it, it's sort of reverse engineering that. And a lot of knowledge comes from that. It comes from manufacturing. And that gets shared not through the internet, but either through email or through word of mouth. The role I had in ROM dumping was that there were these elite guys that would dump the ROMs, but there were a lot of games that were just mostly Japanese. So they needed to have someone to do translating for some of these Japanese games that never came here to the States. So for me, I was a beta tester for some of these guys that would translate the text that were Japanese into English, and we would patch these ROMs up and re-deliver them back into the internet, which is pretty insane. So there's these guys that look at every single tile from the game and try to translate each of those, you know, Japanese characters into something that's English. Some of them had to be some major patchwork, but they would take from maybe as short as two months to maybe a whole year. And these are just guys doing it for fun. This one guy I used to work with, he dumped a lot of these Japanese games, and then he got a letter from Nintendo, a bunch of these other guys. Then he got sued. So the legality, the big thing was, you know, when you're dumping your own cartridges, they're considered yours because it's essentially like just copying your own CD into another CD, right? But the other issue is if you copy someone else's, it's considered illegal because you have a copy and now your friend has a copy. But that's pretty much the gray line. But really, there's a hard line now because Nintendo has changed so much ever since the whole dumping thing has been big. And there's really no way around it now. It's illegal by all standards. So no matter what, when you're dumping something, it's illegal. So, yeah.
Let's be clear before anyone gets into trouble. ROM dumping is illegal. People consider it a gray area at times, but what Radford was talking about, actually going out and getting cartridges and pulling the source code off of them, that's incredibly frowned upon. So please, 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 please use your head before you head off into any of these projects, which, by the way, are very cool. I believe Brian's actually going to show you what our NES MAME looks like right now. This is what we've got. Now, I should note that we actually do own all of these titles. Between us, we've got every single game that's inside of this MAME. It just gives us a really nice way to combine all the games that we loved as kids into one place, which, by the way, has been the source of incredible productivity loss. I believe in the future we're actually going to change this setup. We want to make this a functional case. Right now it's just a Raspberry Pi inside the case. We're going to do a modding project to make this truly a geek's paradise. I know that this was a lot of information. I want to thank everyone who contributed to the show, especially to Brian. He put hours and hours into making that Raspberry Pi MAME. To Radford Castro for talking to us and now possibly being on an FBI wanted list somewhere. And for Shannon Morse, our producer, for everyone who made this possible, especially my co-host Ayaz, who by now is probably on his way back on the back of an eagle after dumping the One Ring. We would like to say to you, to our loyal listeners, our loyal watchers, that we understand that this was a lot of material. It's like drinking through a fire hose. We get it. And so we're going to make it easy for you to do the projects that we just talked about. You don't have to watch it on perpetual loop over and over again. You can go to our show page. That's right. Go to twit.tv/KH Know-How, and you'll be able to find the most descriptive show notes in the entire network. We're going to give you the step-by-step. You want to know exactly how those condensers and dynamic microphones work? I'm going to tell you. You want to see the graphics? They're in there. You want to see the videos? We link to them. You want to see where you can buy them? Of course, that's going to be in the notes. And yes, Ayaz and Brian are going to give you all the steps, in case you were kind of freaking out, to make your own Raspberry Pi MAME machine. Also, we want you to follow us. If you follow us on Google+, we've actually got a really active community that can be reached at gplus.to/twitkh. Go there, and Ayaz and I are both incredibly active in that community. Ask your questions. Throw out a couple of suggestions for future projects. In fact, several of the projects that we have planned came straight from our audience, and that's where we get them from. Also, you can follow us on Twitter. Well, not really following. You can follow me at Padre Astre, but if you send out a tweet with the hashtag TwitKH, asking us for a future project or making a suggestion about our production, we'll get it. We'll definitely listen. We look through those each and every single week. Also, we love to hear from you. So why not send us an email at knowhow@twit.tv. Finally, next week, we're going to be doing a little bit of trick or treat, but until then, now that you know, go forth and do it.